Chosen one, there comes a moment in the spiritual journey that feels nothing like the beginning. It does not feel dramatic, explosive, or even mystical in the way you once imagined. Instead, it feels strangely quiet, almost ordinary, yet deeper than anything you have ever experienced. The final stage of spiritual awakening does not arrive like a lightning bolt. It settles in like a sunrise you didn't notice at first, but suddenly realize has been lighting the sky for a long time. By the time you reach this stage, the chaos that once defined your awakening begins to dissolve. The intense emotional purging, the questioning of everything, the loneliness, the confusion, the constant searching, it all starts to soften. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because something within you no longer resists life the way it once did. In the earlier stages, you were trying to understand truth. Now, you are living it without needing to explain it. You stop chasing meaning because meaning is no longer something outside of you. It becomes the way you breathe, the way you observe, the way you exist without force. You notice that your mind is quieter, but not empty, just no longer loud with fear, comparison, or constant interpretation. Thoughts still come, but they pass through like clouds instead of building storms. There is space inside you now, and that space feels like peace, even when circumstances around you are uncertain. One of the most profound signs of this final stage is the disappearance of the need to become someone. Earlier, awakening may have felt like a journey of transformation, like you were evolving into a higher version of yourself. But in this stage, you realize something unexpected. You are not becoming anything. You are simply no longer pretending to be what you were not. The masks fall away naturally, without effort. You don't try to be spiritual, you don't try to be wise, you don't try to be healed. You simply are, and that feels complete. There is also a deep sense of emotional neutrality, not numbness but balance. You still feel joy, sadness, love, and even pain, but none of these emotions define your identity anymore. They move through you like waves through the ocean, and you remain the ocean itself. This changes how you respond to everything. Situations that once triggered anxiety or anger now meet a calm awareness. Not because you suppress reactions, but because you see through them. You understand their roots, their impermanence, their purpose. Reaction is replaced with understanding, and understanding dissolves resistance. Another subtle but powerful shift happens in your relationship with control. In earlier stages, you may have tried to control your thoughts, your habits, your energy, your destiny. You wanted alignment, growth, progress. But in the final stage, control feels unnecessary. Life flows and you flow with it, not passively, but harmoniously. You still take action, but without inattention. You still make decisions, but without fear of making the wrong one. Trust becomes natural, not forced. You trust life not because you believe everything will go your way, but because you know you can remain whole no matter what happens. Time itself begins to feel different. The past loses its emotional weight, and the future loses its psychological grip. You still remember and plan, but you are no longer trapped in memory or anticipation. Presence becomes your default state, and presence is not something you practice anymore, it's where you live. Even ordinary moments feel full, complete, sufficient. Drinking water, walking quietly, breathing slowly, these are no longer small experiences. They feel vast, alive, and deeply meaningful without needing explanation. Relationships also transform in this stage. You stop seeking validation, approval, or emotional completion from others. Love becomes unconditional, but not in a self-sacrificing way, in a clear, grounded, peaceful way. You allow people to be who they are without trying to fix, change, or rescue them. Boundaries become natural, not defensive. You give without attachment, and you receive without dependency. Loneliness disappears, not because you are always surrounded by people, but because you are no longer separated from yourself. There is also a profound shift in how you perceive suffering. Before, suffering felt personal, something happening to you. Now, suffering is seen as part of the human experience, something that moves through life like weather through the sky. Compassion deepens, not from pity, but from understanding. You recognize yourself in everyone, their fears, their struggles, their searching. Judgment fades because you see clearly how unconsciousness operates, how pain shapes behavior, how awareness unfolds differently for each person. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you deeply kind without effort. Perhaps one of the most surprising aspects of the final stage is how ordinary everything becomes. The mystical experiences that may have once defined your awakening, visions, intense insights, energetic surges, become less important. Not because they were meaningless, but because they were transitional. They were signs pointing you somewhere, and now you have arrived. You no longer need extraordinary experiences to confirm your awareness. Reality itself is enough. Silence becomes deeply nourishing. Not just external silence, but inner stillness. You can sit without needing distraction. You can exist without needing stimulation. This is not boredom, it is fullness. A quiet sense that nothing is missing in this moment. Even when challenges arise, that underlying stillness remains untouched, like a calm depth beneath surface waves. You may also notice that your identity feels lighter, less defined. Labels that once felt important, roles, achievements, personal narratives, lose their emotional intensity. You can still use them in the world, but they no longer confine you. You are not limited to your history. You are not trapped in your story. You exist before the story, beneath the personality, beyond the roles. Fear of the unknown fades significantly in this stage, not because you know what will happen, but because uncertainty no longer feels threatening. Mystery becomes something beautiful rather than something to solve. Life feels like a living unfolding rather than a problem to manage. There is also a quiet joy that begins to permeate everything. Not excitement, not euphoria, just a gentle, steady sense of well-being that does not depend on circumstances. It feels like a soft inner light that never turns off. Even in difficulty, that light remains. And yet, perhaps the deepest realization of all in the final stage of spiritual awakening is this: nothing was ever missing. All the searching, healing, questioning, striving, it was part of the unfolding, but what you were searching for was always present. The awareness reading these words, the presence noticing each moment, that has never changed. Awakening is not gaining something new. It is recognizing what has always been here. From the outside, others may not even notice this transformation. You may appear simple, calm, grounded, ordinary. But inside, everything is different. Life is no longer something happening to you. It is something moving through you as you with you. There is no separation between observer and experience. There is just living awareness expressing itself moment by moment. And so the final stage is not an ending, but a return. A return to simplicity, a return to presence, a return to the quiet truth that existence itself is complete, nothing to chase, nothing to prove, nothing to become. Just this breath, this moment, this life, fully seen, fully accepted, fully lived. As you continue moving deeper into what many call the final stage of spiritual awakening, you begin to notice that even the idea of stages starts to lose its meaning. At first, it was helpful to think in terms of progress, milestones, and breakthroughs. It gave structure to an experience that once felt overwhelming and chaotic. But now something subtle shifts. You no longer feel like you are moving toward awakening, you feel like you are resting inside it. Growth still happens, insight still unfolds, but it no longer feels like a climb. It feels more like a continuous revealing, as if layers of illusion quietly dissolve on their own without you needing to force anything. There is a deep relaxation in this realization. The urgency to arrive disappears because you recognize there was never a destination separate from where you are. This stage often brings a profound sense of inner stability that cannot easily be shaken by external events. Life still changes, circumstances still rise and fall, unexpected things still happen, but something within you remains unmoved, like a steady center that does not collapse when the outer world becomes uncertain. You begin to experience yourself less as the person reacting to life and more as the awareness within which life unfolds. This shift is subtle but transformative. Instead of being pulled into every emotional current, you witness emotions as movements of energy passing through your field of experience. They are allowed, felt fully, and released naturally without resistance or clinging. In earlier phases, you may have worked very hard to heal your past. You may have explored childhood wounds, patterns of fear, cycles of attachment, and layers of emotional conditioning. That process was necessary because it brought unconscious material into awareness. But in the final stage, healing feels different. It no longer feels like something you do. It feels like something that happens automatically in the presence of awareness. Old memories may still arise, but they appear without emotional charge. They are seen, understood, and integrated without struggle. The past loses its ability to define who you are. It becomes information rather than identity. Another striking feature of this stage is the disappearance of inner conflict. Before, there may have been competing voices inside you, one part wanting growth, another resisting change, one part seeking peace, another clinging to familiar patterns. But now the division begins to dissolve. There is less psychological friction. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer filtered through fear, insecurity, or the need for approval. You act from clarity rather than in a negotiation. Even when choices are complex, there is a sense of quiet certainty guiding you from within. Your relationship with desire also transforms. Desire does not vanish, but its nature changes. You no longer chase fulfillment through external achievements, possessions, or recognition. When desires arise, they feel lighter, more playful, less tied to your sense of worth. You can pursue goals without believing they will complete you. And if something does not happen the way you expected, disappointment passes quickly because your inner state is not dependent on outcomes. Satisfaction comes from being aligned with the present moment rather than controlling what the moment should become. There is also a deepening sensitivity to truth. Not intellectual truth, but experiential authenticity. You become highly attuned to what feels real and what feels artificial, both within yourself and in the world around you. Pretense becomes uncomfortable. Forced conversations, superficial interactions, and unnecessary complexity naturally fall away from your life. You are drawn toward simplicity, honesty, and depth. This does not mean you reject the world. It means you engage with it more genuinely without needing to perform or impress. Silence continues to expand in importance, but not as an escape from noise. Silence becomes something alive, something nourishing. It is no longer just the absence of sound, it is the presence of awareness itself. In silence, you feel connected, grounded, complete. You may notice that you speak less, but when you do speak, your words carry more clarity and intention. Communication becomes purposeful rather than habitual. Your perception of others undergoes a profound transformation as well. Instead of seeing people primarily through their behavior, you begin to sense the deeper consciousness within them. Even if they are not aware of it themselves, you see beyond roles, personalities, and defenses. This changes how you respond to conflict. Instead of reacting to surface actions, you recognize the pain, fear, or confusion beneath them. Compassion becomes instinctive, not because you try to be compassionate, but because separation feels less real. You understand that everyone is navigating their own level of awareness, their own timing, their own unfolding. Interestingly, the need to explain your spiritual experience to others often fades during this stage. Earlier, you may have felt a strong urge to share what you were discovering, to talk about insights, realizations, and shifts in perception. But now explanation feels less necessary, not because your experience is secret, but because it feels self-evident. Like trying to explain what it means to be alive, it is something that can only truly be known directly. You may still share when invited, but you no longer feel compelled to convince anyone of anything. The concept of purpose also transforms in a profound way. In earlier stages, you may have searched intensely for your life purpose, believing it to be a specific mission, role, or path you needed to discover. But in the final stage, purpose feels inseparable from presence itself. Being fully aware, fully alive, fully engaged with each moment becomes the purpose. Action flows naturally from that state. Sometimes it leads to creative expression, service, teaching, building, or caring. Other times it leads to stillness and quiet living. Both feel equally meaningful because purpose is no longer defined by what you do, it is defined by how consciously you exist. Another deep realization that often emerges is the understanding that nothing needs to be fixed in order for peace to exist. The mind once believed peace would come after problems were solved, after healing was complete, after life was stable. But now you see clearly that peace is not the result of conditions, it is the background of awareness itself. Even when challenges arise, peace remains available because it is not dependent on circumstances. This changes your entire relationship with difficulty. Problems are addressed, but they are no longer experienced as threats to your inner state. You may also notice that your sense of individuality becomes more fluid. You still function as a person with a name, a history, preferences, and responsibilities. But beneath that, there is a growing recognition that your true nature is not confined to the personal self. You feel connected to life in a way that cannot be fully described. Nature feels more alive, other beings feel less separate, even simple existence feels shared rather than isolated. This does not erase individuality, it places it within a much larger field of awareness. Gratitude becomes constant, but not dramatic. It is quiet, steady, ever-present. Not gratitude for specific things, but gratitude for being itself, for breathing, for perceiving, for existing. This gratitude does not require effort, it flows naturally from the recognition of how complete each moment already is. One of the most liberating aspects of this stage is the absence of fear around losing the awakened state. Earlier, you may have worried about regressing, about falling back into unconsciousness, about losing clarity. But now you understand that awareness is not something you hold, it is what you are. It cannot be lost because it is not an achievement. It is the foundation of every experience, including moments of confusion or distraction. Even when the mind becomes busy, awareness remains unchanged beneath it. And perhaps most profoundly, you begin to experience life not as a series of separate moments, but as a seamless flow. There is a sense of continuity, a gentle unfolding that connects everything. Nothing feels random, yet nothing feels controlled. There is just movement, alive, intelligent, spontaneous. You are not standing outside this movement, observing it. You are the movement itself, expressing, perceiving, unfolding in real time. In this deepening stillness, a simple understanding settles into your being. Awakening was never about becoming extraordinary. It was about becoming completely natural, completely real. And in that naturalness, life reveals its quiet perfection, not as an idea, not as a belief, but as a direct, living experience unfolding moment by moment without effort, without resistance, without separation. As this deep stabilization of awareness continues, something even more subtle begins to unfold. Your relationship with reality itself transforms in a way that is almost impossible to explain using ordinary language. You no longer experience life as something happening up there, while you exist separately in here. The invisible boundary between observer and experience begins to dissolve completely. Sound is not something you hear, it is simply happening within the same field of awareness that you are. Sensations are not something you possess, they arise in the same open presence that thoughts arise in. Even the sense of being a separate self, once so solid and unquestioned, starts to feel more like a temporary pattern than a permanent identity. This does not feel strange or disorienting. It feels natural, more natural than anything you have ever known. In fact, you may realize that what once felt normal was actually a kind of tension, a subtle contraction of consciousness that created the illusion of separation. Now that contraction has relaxed. Life feels immediate, direct, unfiltered. You are no longer interpreting reality from a distance, you are immersed in it completely. In this stage, thinking loses its authority. Thoughts still appear, but they are no longer treated as ultimate truth. They are recognized as mental movements, useful in practical situations, but not reliable as definitions of reality. This recognition changes everything. The mind can still plan, analyze, and imagine, but it no longer creates psychological suffering in the same way. Fear-based narratives are seen as stories, not facts. Worry arises and dissolves without constructing an emotional prison. Even self-critical thoughts lose their power because there is no longer a solid self-image for them to attack. You begin to notice that most human suffering is rooted in identification, identifying with thoughts, emotions, roles, and expectations as if they define who you are. In the final stage of awakening, this identification weakens dramatically. Experiences happen, but they do not stick. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not diminish you. Success does not define you. Failure does not break you. Everything flows through a vast openness that remains unchanged. Another profound shift is the deep sense of effortlessness that enters your life. Previously, awareness may have felt like something you needed to maintain through practice, through meditation, mindfulness, or conscious discipline. But now, awareness is no longer something you do. It is simply present continuously without effort. Even when attention becomes focused on tasks, conversations, or challenges, the background presence remains untouched. It is like a silent foundation supporting every experience without ever needing reinforcement. This effortless awareness brings a new quality to action. You still participate fully in life. You work, create, communicate, move, and respond. But action no longer feels driven by inner pressure. There is no sense of forcing life forward or holding life back. Movement happens naturally, guided by clarity rather than compulsion. You may notice that decisions arise spontaneously without overthinking. Words come when needed, silence comes when appropriate. Life seems to organize itself with an intelligence that does not require constant mental supervision. This can feel deeply liberating because the burden of self-management dissolves. You are no longer trying to perfect yourself, improve yourself, or constantly monitor your inner state. Growth still happens, but it happens organically, like a plant growing towards sunlight without needing instructions. There is trust in the natural unfolding of life, not blind trust, but experiential trust born from seeing how everything moves in harmony when resistance fades. One of the most remarkable features of this stage is the transformation of perception itself. The world appears more vivid, more immediate, more alive. Colors may seem richer, sounds clearer, sensations more precise. But this heightened perception is not overstimulating, it is peaceful. There is a sense that reality is revealing itself directly, without the usual mental filters that categorize and label everything automatically. You see things as they are, before the mind turns them into concepts. Even ordinary moments carry a profound sense of depth. Watching light move across a wall, hearing distant sounds blend together, feeling the rhythm of your breath, these simple experiences feel complete, self-sufficient, meaningful without needing interpretation. Nothing is just ordinary anymore because everything is recognized as an expression of the same living presence. In this stage, resistance becomes almost impossible to maintain. When discomfort arises, physical pain, emotional sadness, external difficulty, it is felt fully, directly, without the additional layer of mental opposition. And without resistance, suffering changes its nature. Pain may still exist, but the psychological struggle around pain disappears quickly. Experience moves freely, like energy flowing without obstruction. This freedom from resistance brings an unexpected softness into your being. You become deeply receptive to life, open to whatever arises. This openness is not vulnerability in the sense of weakness, it is strength in the form of flexibility. You can bend without breaking, adapt without losing yourself, allow without becoming passive. Another profound realization often emerges here: the recognition that awareness is not personal. It does not belong to you as an individual. The same awareness through which you experience life is the same awareness through which all experience happens. This is not an abstract philosophy, it becomes a felt reality. When you look at another person, you do not just see their personality or behavior, you sense the same presence looking through different eyes. This recognition deepens compassion beyond anything that can be cultivated intentionally. Kindness becomes spontaneous because the sense of otherness has softened. At the same time, you become more comfortable with paradox. Life no longer needs to be logically consistent to feel true. Opposites coexist naturally: stillness and movement, individuality and unity, form and emptiness. The mind may not fully understand this, but awareness does not require explanation. Mystery is no longer uncomfortable, it is welcomed. You may also notice that your relationship with meaning undergoes a profound transformation. Earlier, meaning may have been something you searched for, something you wanted life to provide. Now, meaning is not something added to experience, it is inherent in existence itself. Simply being aware feels meaningful. Simply participating in life feels complete. This dissolves the existential emptiness that many people carry without understanding why. There is also a deep sense of intimacy with life that becomes constant. Not emotional intensity, but closeness, an undeniable connection with everything that appears. The movement of wind, the presence of others, the flow of time, even the silence between sounds, all of it feels intimately known, as if nothing is truly separate from the field of awareness in which it appears. Interestingly, this stage often brings profound humility. Not forced humility, but natural humility born from recognizing that the individual self was never the central controller of existence. Life has always been unfolding through countless interconnected forces beyond personal control. Recognizing this does not make you feel small, it makes you feel integrated, part of something vast and intelligent. And yet, even with all these shifts, life continues to look simple from the outside. You still live, work, interact, and navigate the world like anyone else. But internally, the struggle to define, defend, and preserve a separate identity has dissolved. What remains is openness, clarity, and a quiet sense of completeness that does not depend on circumstances. Perhaps the most subtle realization of all in this stage is that awakening is not an event you remember. It is the absence of the one who was waiting for the event. The seeker fades. The search ends not because something was found, but because the illusion of separation that created the search is no longer convincing. What remains is just this continuous unfolding of life, moment by moment, without resistance, without grasping, without the need to become anything more than what is already here. Awareness aware of itself, expressing itself as everything, moving effortlessly through form and experience with silent clarity and boundless presence. And then there comes a depth so quiet, so subtle, that even calling it a stage feels too structured for what it truly is. It is not an experience you enter and exit. It is not a state you maintain. It is simply the complete absence of inner division. Life is no longer filtered through the sense that something should be different than it is. The silent background of awareness that once appeared during meditation, reflection, or still moments is now inseparable from every activity. Walking, speaking, working, resting, thinking, feeling, none of these disturb the stillness. They arise within it, move through it, and dissolve back into it, like patterns forming and fading on the surface of water that never loses its depth. At this point, the idea of maintaining consciousness disappears entirely. There is nothing to maintain because nothing is separate from awareness. Even distraction is seen clearly as another movement within presence. Even confusion is noticed without resistance. Even moments of emotional intensity unfold without creating the old sense of psychological entanglement. Everything is allowed because everything is already included. There is no outside to awareness, no experience that threatens it, no condition that completes it. This recognition is not philosophical, it is immediate, lived, undeniable. One of the most profound shifts here is the complete release of psychological effort. Earlier in your journey, effort played an important role. You observed your thoughts, redirected your attention, practiced presence, questioned belief, released patterns. All of that helped dissolve the density of unconsciousness. But now effort has nowhere to attach itself. There is nothing left to fix, improve, or purify, not because the personality has become perfect, but because perfection is no longer defined by form. Perfection is recognized as the wholeness of what is, exactly as it appears. You may notice that the sense of a doing life fades into something far more fluid. Actions happen, words are spoken, decisions unfold, but they do not feel authored in the same way they once did. There is responsiveness, intelligence, movement, but not the tight inner claim of ownership. Life expresses itself through this body, this mind, this personality, yet there is no heavy sense of possession over the process. It feels similar to breathing. Breathing happens, yet you are not forcing each breath into existence. Living begins to feel like that, spontaneous, self-organizing, naturally unfolding. This brings an extraordinary lightness to existence. Responsibility still exists in practical ways. You still honor commitments, care for others, make choices, but the psychological weight of responsibility dissolves. You no longer carry the illusion that everything depends on your personal control. There is participation without burden, engagement without strain, involvement without attachment. Another deep transformation occurs in how you experience time unfolding. Previously, presence may have felt like being in the moment, as opposed to thinking about the past or future. Now, even that distinction fades. Time continues to function practically. You remember, you anticipate, you plan, but internally there is only continuous immediacy. Past and future are recognized as appearances within present awareness rather than places you mentally travel to. Everything arises now, even memory. Everything unfolds now, even anticipation. There is nowhere else to be, and this is no longer an idea, it is directly perceived. Because of this, patience becomes effortless. Waiting does not feel like delay. Silence does not feel like absence. Stillness does not feel like inactivity. Every moment contains the same completeness. Urgency, which once drove so many thoughts and actions, dissolves into calm responsiveness. You move when movement is natural. You rest when stillness is natural. There is no internal pressure pushing life forward or holding it back. Another subtle yet profound realization begins to stabilize here, the understanding that awareness is not located anywhere. It is not inside your body, not behind your eyes, not contained within the mind. Instead, everything you once believed to be inside and outside appears within awareness itself. The body is perceived, thoughts are perceived, the world is perceived, but awareness itself has no boundary. This dissolves the deep-rooted assumption that you are a center surrounded by experience. Instead, there is only open experiencing, without a fixed center. This recognition brings a deep sense of vastness that does not feel distant or abstract. It feels intimate, closer than breath, closer than sensation, closer than thought. Everything appears within this vast openness, yet nothing is separate from it. You do not merge with life. You discover you were never separate from it to begin with. As this understanding stabilizes, fear loses its foundation. Not just specific fears, but the underlying sense of existential insecurity that quietly shaped so much of human experience. The fear of loss, the fear of change, the fear of death. These begin to soften because what you truly are is no longer experienced as something fragile or temporary. Forms change. Bodies age. Situations shift. But awareness itself remains untouched by every transformation it witnesses. This does not become a belief, it becomes obvious in direct experience. Even the concept of death is perceived differently here. Rather than appearing as an absolute end, it is understood as a transformation of form within the same boundless field of awareness. The fear that once came from identifying with the body and personality dissolves into a quiet acceptance of life's continuous unfolding. There is peace not because you know what happens, but because what you are is not threatened by not knowing. Another beautiful quality that often stabilizes in this phase is deep, unconditional ease. Not happiness as an emotional high, but ease as the absence of inner resistance. The nervous system relaxes into existence. The body feels more grounded, more open, less armored. Even during activity, there is an undercurrent of relaxation that never fully disappears. It feels as though life is no longer something you must brace yourself against. Creativity also changes form. Expression flows more freely because it is no longer driven by the need to prove, achieve, or validate identity. Whether you speak, write, build, help, or simply observe, expression becomes an extension of presence rather than an attempt to become something. There is authenticity without self-consciousness, simplicity without self-denial. You may also notice that understanding becomes less verbal. Insight no longer arrives primarily as thoughts or conclusions. Instead, there is direct knowing, immediate, silent clarity that does not require explanation. The mind can still translate this clarity into language when necessary, but the knowing itself exists before words. It is intuitive, whole, instantaneous. Perhaps one of the most humbling and liberating realizations of all arises here. Nothing about this awakening is personal. It does not belong to you. It is not your achievement. It is not something you created through effort or discipline alone. It is simply the natural recognition of what has always been present. Just as the sky does not become the sky through effort, awareness does not become aware through accomplishment. It reveals itself when the clouds of misidentification clear, and because of this, there is no sense of superiority, no sense of having reached something others have not. There is only understanding that the same awareness lives through every being, expressing itself in different ways, unfolding at different rhythms. Compassion deepens even further because you see clearly that confusion, struggle, and seeking are all movements within the same awakening process. At this depth, life becomes profoundly simple. Not because complexity disappears from the world, but because the need to mentally grasp and control complexity dissolves. Experience unfolds. Awareness knows it. Response happens naturally, and that is enough. Nothing spectacular needs to occur for fulfillment to exist. Nothing dramatic needs to change for peace to remain. The extraordinary reveals itself as the ordinary seen clearly. Breathing is complete. Seeing is complete. Being is complete. And so what remains in this final flowering of spiritual awakening is not a permanent state of bliss, not endless mystical experience, not constant emotional elevation, but something far more stable and real. A silent, unshakable recognition that life and awareness are not two separate things. That what you are has never been missing, never been broken, never been incomplete. There is just this endless unfolding of existence, appearing moment by moment within boundless presence, effortless, indivisible whole, no seeker, no separation. Just life knowing itself, living itself, expressing itself here, now, always.